Hello. Good afternoon to one and all who has joined us today for this incredible session. I am Richa Mukhopadhyay and I am currently pursuing BLLB honors and in my 4th year with Cyber and IPR as my specialization. I am also a team member of WCSF. The World Cybersecurity Forum is an internationally renowned cyber consultancy and web community, which is founded in 2019 that aims in improving cybersecurity awareness and acts as a source of techno-legal information for professionals, students, and teenagers around the world. It offers a blend of original content from IT professionals, peer-to-peer advice from the largest community of IT leaders, and an extensive library of professional resources from leading IT industry vendors. Recently, WCSF launched Cybercrime Awareness 2020 program, which is a global initiative to support emerging trends in cyber law, cybercrime, and cybersecurity. Now, this event is an interesting one as it revolves around IoT, which is Internet of Things, and it refers to a system of interrelated, interconnected objects that are able to collect and transfer data over a wireless network without human intervention, and also the legal aspects which are associated with it. We often hear about the legislations, regulations, and standards in today's landscape when we talk about IoT devices. There are general IoT or cybersecurity legislations and regulations of the industry. For example, the HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. These legislations and regulations may also vary depending on your location. To decipher new legislation, current regulation, and ID standards, you build IoT products, develop IoT apps, or manufacture large amounts of data in order to ensure and safety to the IoT world. Without further delay, I would like to introduce our today's guest speaker, whom we are absolutely privileged to have with us today, Sai Sushanth. He's a cyber law expert and techno-legal consultant. He's the CEO of Sushanth IT Law Associates. He's an academician, author, corporate trainer, and legal mentor. He has spoken in 900 plus conferences and has addressed 140 plus webinars during the pandemic. He has published various articles in international and national conferences. He has also received many awards and accolades and has recently been awarded as the Best Cyber Lawyer of the Year 2020 by Indian Legal. He will take us through the backdrop and journey of the emergence of IoT that has resulted in a wide interaction between the different internet-enabled devices and the exchange of enormous volumes of data among them, which has further led to challenges in the existing legislation and rules on the protection of information, data security, intellectual property, and product liability. If you are having any questions related to the topic, please share them in the comment box below, and we will pick them one by one, and our honorable speaker will be answering them. Now, without causing much delay, I would request Sushanth sir to take over and enlighten us with his knowledge. Also, due to some technical issues, our speaker is currently unable to turn on his camera today. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. A very good morning to all the participants of this session. And it's again a very interesting topic that's there today. I think Internet of Things and law is going to be a very, very interesting topic, shall I say, to start with. And I believe this Sunday morning, as we are all discussing, there are going to be lots of things that are going to come up over the landscape of Internet of Things and law. And before I get to my presentation, I thought I should just give you a small background on Internet of Things and then get started with my presentation in the meantime. I believe that we are all already users of Internet-enabled devices, whether it's your smart automation, or whether it's Amazon Alexas, or whether it's Google Homes, or whether it's your smart watches, smart TVs, and smart gadgets. I believe these are already become our constant life companions. And then we already have started to see that these IoT devices have become our part and parcel of our lives. So with this, I think I believe that I will take you through a very interesting kind of a scenario, because I have very interesting developments and case studies that I wish to discuss with you, which are happening over the horizon. And I believe these are just uh, the law on the eye, and I believe there's a lot to be done as we can get started on this interesting journey. So thank you so much. I thank the organizers for this wonderful opportunity. I thank the host, and also thank Paki Garg for this opportunity. And then I believe that in sessions like this will act as key catalysts in coming up with some kinds of directions with regard to the legal, policy, regulatory aspects surrounding to emerging technologies, including IoT. So I think we'll get started without any delay. Can you connect the presentation, please?
Sure, sir.
Yeah. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. So this is the usual response I evoke when I'm taking a session, specifically on Sundays and specifically at this time. So I know that I'm fully conscious of the fact that it's a holiday and it's completely a different kind of an atmosphere. Let me try and make this very interesting. Next slide, please. Yeah. So I believe this is the world of IoT, and on the top of it, as you're seeing, whether it's smart gadgets that we have, smart air conditioners, smart watches, smart gadgets, whether it's smart refrigerators, smart microwave ovens, or any of these, basically, any of these gadgets that have the capability to get connected to the internet. I think in a very very broad sense can be called an internet connected device. More specifically, the scenario is that today I don't see anything that's not connected to the internet, whether it's your cameras, because we have a lot of Wi-Fi streaming that's happening, whether it's your smart gadgets, even vehicles have now come up with internet enabled options. We already saw that this company called Morris Garages has come up with an IoT based system in its vehicle. It was an initial one that was started, and now we already started to see level one autonomous cars, which is an AI based solution for the automobile industry. That's now already been the ground reality. So I think with things like this, it's a very, very fascinating journey. And more so when these internet connected devices are actually intertwined with other technologies, whether it's artificial intelligence or blockchain or 3D printing, I think it's a totally different kind of a gamut that comes on the table. The reason is that given the connectedness that these internet connected devices have is going to be enormous. It's going to be both positive and negative. I believe that positiveness is something that we'll have to constantly look at, because technology is something that you can't run away with. And I constantly believe that we have to get ourselves adjusted and accustomed with technology. And of course, there'll be a lot of technical and legal challenges, but not to worry that in any kind of scenario, I believe risks and risk mitigation would have to be the strategies that we'll have to adopt. But today, I'll just take you through the international as well as Indian perspectives to just give you a glimpse on what kind of legalities are surrounded with regard to these IoT based technology. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Yeah, I would like to start off by saying that this is a very interesting case with regard to the smart TVs. I think this is a way long back story, and today I think smart TVs have become the next gadget that's there in almost everyone's house today. And more specifically, shall I say that these smart televisions are used at large during this COVID-19 period, when all of us today get stuck to Amazon, Netflix, and things like that. I think it's a different ball game altogether. So I just wanted to take you through this very interesting case that I believe has actually been a mover and shaker of our times. The reason here is that most of us make use of these smart televisions in our bedrooms. And look what happened in Malaysia. So this was a very interesting case study. And most of these smart TVs also give you an option to connect external cameras onto the devices. So we had Skype also, which is one of the very good applications during that period. This way long back when we didn't have these many kinds of applications in use as we're using today. And one couple, they started using the Skype camera because they were living in a totally different place altogether to interact with their family and friends. Well, lo and behold, one fine day, it was a very surprise to them that they received an email from an unknown source, wherein the email had got private pictures and also few private clips of their moments in their respective bedrooms. Well, they were absolutely wonderstruck and they did not know what exactly happened. But ladies and gentlemen, let me just remind you something, that these devices all obviously run on a Wi-Fi network. Therefore, they get connected to the internet through Wi-Fi. So therefore, my advice is, in case you do not use these, please disconnect your Wi-Fi, because failing which, you do not have any idea if these kind of attacks can take place. If you have a camera, wonderful. These cameras can also be switched on to record all your private moments. So with and without your knowledge. So that's going to be the kind of exposure that I can see. And lo and behold, that these kind of instances are wake-up calls to just have some basic practices while you're actually making use of these kind of smart gadgets. I thought this is a wonderful scenario because this can happen to anybody, including you and me. I believe that we are all in the transient times, and waking up of and then getting these kinds of messages would be one of the most challenging aspects, shall I say, on that too specifically when you're in a mood of a holiday. So I think these are some illustrations to just show you that Wi-Fi could be compromised, and these smart gadgets also are prone to hack and other kinds of unauthorized access. So I thought I should just take you through this wonderful case. Can we move on to the next slide, please? In one of the corporate companies, a smart microwave was actually used to actually send spam. Wow. Now you will ask me, how can a microwave oven be used for sending spam? Well, all these corporate offices that we have, they have all of these smart gadgets for helping out their employees. And then their intentions are very noble, but when you have these gadgets which are connected to the internet, I think it's going to be a different ball game altogether when it comes to the unauthorized access per se. Now, if this kind of a scenario can happen, and then anything and everything can be possible when I try to compromise the Wi-Fi network and use that for perpetrating any of the criminal activities. So in this kind of a scenario, the Wi-Fi network of the company was compromised, and as a result, using this medium, spam was generated. Well, as I'm talking to you this morning, we do not have a dedicated spam legislation in India, and India is known to be one of the spam generators, highest spam generators in the country, in the world, shall I say. And then it's very unfortunate that we don't have much provisions relating to that. I think we'll have to wake up out of deep slumber and then try to pay attention and coming up with some legislations or provisions relating regulation of spam per se. Next slide, please. Well, the smart refrigerator is also one thing that has actually been a very interesting scenario altogether. Today, we have these smart gadgets, which also give you an alarm in case the door of the respective refrigerator is open. But per se, I believe that we're all smart in trying to use these gadgets. But if you don't have any kinds of understanding on the basic security and the legalities, I think that smartness can be overturned by these kinds of instances. So I think the real smartness would come in when we have some kinds of basic understanding on the basic security measures and also the legal, some legal aspects that we as users of these gadgets are really expected to be aware of. In this scenario, the smart refrigerator was used, and as a result, some kind of unauthorized network attack has taken place by compromising the respective security of this respective smart refrigerator. I think these are just wake-up calls, but though these are wake-up calls, I believe that there's no denying the basic fact that uh, the IoT devices also are moving in the wrong direction per se. Next slide, please. Now, IoT-based water bottles are also something that now is not only the reality in the Western countries, but it's also now become the ground reality in India. We started to see a lot of these devices that actually try to record the consumption of water and also give you an alarm with help of these notifications in order to ensure that you drink sufficient water in a day. But well, these are all going to integrate a lot of personal and sensitive data of ours, whether it's your health related information or medical related information or your personal information or any of these. And it's going to be a very interesting ball game altogether, because we do not have any idea how these data get saved and who are all the stakeholders in this particular data, and how does this data get itself saved onto the system. I think all these interesting questions will bring in some kind of discussions and deliberations on IoT and law. So I think these are just interesting scenarios. It's just not only confined to one spectrum, shall I say, it's also expanding its horizon to different sectors, shall I say. Next slide, please. Now, we also started to see IoT showers. Well, we thought IoT is only confined to only few aspects, but just imagine you're in the shower and then you have an IoT based control for monitoring the temperature of water. And just imagine what kind of issues can happen in case somebody actually manages to get into the network. They can increase the temperature, they can make the water very hot, and they can make the hot water very cool, and thereby causing temperature differences. They can even go ahead and deteriorate the health condition of the person who's actually taking that shower. So it's just not enough that we have an understanding about these smart gadgets, but I think having some understanding on how to use them will also be adequate in case you want to make a proper use of the said gadgets. Next slide, please. I just wanted to take you through this interesting case that has come to me a couple of years back. And these were the instances of cyber espionage, as well as some kind of cyber revenge, shall I say. We had this company in Hyderabad. I don't want to name the company. And then they came to know that IoT-based air conditioners are available in the market. They thought this is the best time that they actually go ahead and install these, because they had actually taken a new kind of a office premises. They thought they can be smart enough to control all of these with the help of a mobile phone. So they went ahead and changed all of the air conditioners in the company with these smart IoT-based air conditioners. And even in the server room, they actually got these IoT-based ACs installed. And one of the very interesting scenarios that has happened here is that they thought it's very good that they will be able to access the set temperatures of the ACs on the mobile. It was very initial days, and they thought it's a breath of fresh air. But that kind of understanding didn't last for much time. We had a very interesting unauthorized access that has taken place, because two of the technical people in the team got fired for not completing the work on time. They decided that they should seek cyber vengeance against the company. So this was on a Saturday, and they went ahead and changed the temperature of this particular air conditioner in the server room to the maximum. And by the time the company realized, the damage has already been done. The server was not able to get booted because of some heating related issues. But fortunately, 60% of the code that was actually put on the server was actually copied, but the other 40% was not copied. So therefore, at least some kind of a financial loss to the company, but not complete financial loss. But I must say that they were at least having some understanding that in case such unauthorized access takes place, they had some kind of mechanism to detect the same. So I think this detection was something that actually saved them from completely getting themselves into financial trouble. So I think these are some instances that are going to really change the legal landscape of IoT devices, because in this kind of a scenario, it will be very interesting to examine the kind of legal liability, specifically in the light of IoT security. Next slide, please. So this famous company called Arrow had actually started IoT based shirts, where you try to make your shirt a smart shirt, and all you need to do is on the cuffs you have a small IoT sensor, and then you had a mobile app to which it was linked, and you could do a number of activities using the same. You could share your business card, you could launch your favorite application, you could play your favorite song, you could actually share your LinkedIn profile, and there were a lot of activities that you can do with your IoT based smart shirt. I think these also are very interesting scenarios that are happening in the space of IoT, but these are also some things that require some kinds of legal policy regulatory aspects. Next slide, please. Now, it's just not the shirts. We already started to see the revolution of Internet of Trousers. Wow. Now they give you some kind of an alert in case you have to get up. And there are lots of other alerts that are provided in these IoT based trousers. Well, one of the very interesting scenarios that I would like to share here is that these IoT based trousers are also acting as a diet control mechanism. And you'll say how? Well, it's a very simple example. On the right side, you're able to see the image, which actually has the IoT based trouser, which has something called a fridge lock mode. In all these devices, IoT based devices, one of the most fascinating thing that comes to the mind is that the interconnectedness that these devices have. Now, if you're having a smart IoT based refrigerator, you're wearing a smart IoT based trouser, it's a completely different paradigm altogether. And the moment the trouser detects that there is the waistline around your waist is increasing, it completely locks the fridge access to the respective person. The reason here is it does not want him to go and pick up food or food articles from the refrigerator, because it feels that this guy should not now be reducing his waistline, and then only he should go ahead and actually continue. I think these are that good right control mechanisms, though they appear smart. But I think the legal nuances behind this would have to be something that we'll have to constantly discuss and be aware of. Next slide, please. Now, this remote work, that's work from home, is also raising a lot of different kinds of cyber threats and cyber challenges, specifically from consumer IoT devices. Well, all of us today are either using Amazon Alexas or Google Homes or Amazon Echoes, Amazon Dots, and the like. And it's going to be a different ballgame altogether when we start operating work from home scenarios with these gadgets in the same room. Let me tell you one interesting case study that has come to me during this time of COVID-19. I had one of the employees working for a company, and then this guy was working from home because of COVID-19. He had this Amazon device with him, and uh, in the same room where he was actually trying to attend his online meetings. Well, in a week's time, he received a parcel from Amazon, and he was stunned because he was never ordered that. A very interesting scenario that has taken place here is the device recorded the conversations of the respective person, interpreted that there is a requirement for the said item, and went ahead and placed an order in Amazon without the consent of this respective person. So I think these are some things that are raising huge amounts of threats, specifically during this period of COVID-19, because it's not just the personal data of the respective user that's going to be at stake, but there's also going to be a lot of confidential and personal data of the company, which is also now going to be raising threats, because these are some things that company believe that are going to be their assets, because information is the asset today. And during this period of transient times, it's a very interesting and fascinating journey when we have such kinds of unauthorized data breaches. So I think a lot of companies are waking up to the reality that there's a requirement for coming up with user IoT devices policy to define the kinds of responsibilities that employees need to exercise while they're exercising their work from home option, specifically with IoT devices in their respective home. So I think these are interesting scenarios per se. Next slide, please. So industrial IoT is already now become the ground reality. Internet of Things is also leveraged by a lot of industries for a different kind of purposes altogether. We have the sensors, IoT-based sensors and chips, which are used for different kinds of activities, whether it's processing, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's giving some kinds of alerts, some kinds of analytics, and things like that. A lot of these machines and tools are fed with these kinds of IoT sensors to give the real-time alerts to the respective companies with regard to production. I think it's a very fascinating journey, but I believe that privacy and securities are going to be two eyes when I talk of IoT law in a nutshell. I think these are instances that companies will have to quickly realize so as to ensure that they have proper policies in place, and they also try to understand that the privacy and the data security are adequately protected. So these are also some things that are going to be putting up different kinds of matters altogether in the legal horizon of IoT, because now this industrial IoT is also likely to bring in huge amounts of issues, specifically when these are connected with your mobile phones, because your mobile phones are used today for a variety of purposes, whether it's personal, professional, social, or otherwise. And you might get connected to different applications. You might have different kinds of data, and these kinds of integrations that are happening will be bringing in huge amounts of legal policy regulatory aspects, shall I say, with regard to the data and privacy per se. Next slide, please. Now, we already started to see that the IoT-based fish tanks are now become the ground reality. And in a casino, an IoT-based fish tank, which was actually trying to, whose temperature can now be controlled with the help of your mobile phone, because it's IoT-based fish tank. And it's a wonderful scenario altogether. But lo and behold, the attackers went on to attack the said IoT fish tank, compromised the network, and then managed to breach the data of the casino. So this is going to be instances of how data breaches are likely to take place with the help of these IoT devices per se. Next slide. Now, when I talk of privacy, I think the international golden standard of IoT is protection of privacy. End of the day, I believe that any kinds of IoT devices will have to first pay attention to privacy. And at the time of manufacturing these IoT devices, I think privacy by design and default would have to be the primary mantra that the IoT manufacturers will have to keep in mind. Because today, when I talk about privacy in India, it's by and large a different ball game altogether. The reason is that thanks to the latest Supreme Court judgment, privacy is now made the fundamental right. So any kinds of breach of privacy will no longer be a privacy legal issue, but it's also likely to bring in some constitutional legality to the said privacy breach. You can now exercise the writ remedies under Article 32 and Article 226 of the Constitution of India, and you can go ahead and invoke writ jurisdiction of High Court and Supreme Court in case of breach of privacy. I think these are very interesting scenarios that are likely to be popping up. So when I talk of privacy, I would like to just talk about two aspects. One is data privacy, other is personal privacy. Now, data privacy, given the fact that these IoT devices are having interconnectedness, it's a different matter altogether. Now, let's take an example of an IoT device. We don't have any idea how the data is shared across these devices because we have a lot of these interconnectedness. Let's take an example of your smartwatch. The data that you are accessing on your smartwatch can also be shared with the mobile application of the said smartwatch, and we don't have any idea who are all going to be parties to this kind of your personal data. So this, in this kind of a scenario, protecting data privacy would be the key epitome, shall I say, for IoT-based device manufacturers. And apart from that, when you have these IoT-based devices that go on to record the video of people, and we already started to see different kinds of misuse that is taking place. I'll tell you one instance of a baby monitor, which is an IoT-based monitor, which basically was used to actually detect the movements of a baby. Now, lo and behold, the said IoT baby monitor was actually inbuilt with a camera to actually detect the movements of the child and alert the parents when the child makes a movement. Well, it's a noble intention, but the hackers went on to attack and actually try to compromise the said device, and they were having cyber sadistic pleasures. When the mother was actually breastfeeding the respective child, I think these guys were trying to take pictures, videos of the said using these baby monitors. I think these are just instances to just demonstrate that the IoT manufacturers would also have to be paying attention not just to data privacy but also to personal privacy per se. So these are just two parameters that have to be paramount when I talk of privacy per se. Next slide, please. Now, anything and everything that's generated out of these IoT devices, when I talk to you in the context of Indian law, I believe are nothing but electronic records, thanks to Section 21T of the IT Act and Section 4 of the IT Act. IT Act, shall I say, is the mother legislation of India. And if I were to talk of five significant laws passed by independent India, I will definitely try to say that Indian cyber law, that is Information Technology Act, is one among them. It is the only law that is going to deal with anything and everything that's digital. The moment you're making use of these seven parameters, I think definitely cyber law is going to be made applicable to you. The moment you're making use of computers, computer systems, computer networks, computer resources, communication devices, as also data or information in the electronic format, you'll have to now be aware that cyber law is now going to be made applicable to you. So therefore, it's a law that's going to give legal recognition and legal validity to electronic transactions per se. It's not a penal statute, and it's the noble intention of the act is to give legal recognition and legal validity to electronic transactions per se. So looking at that broadly, anything that's generated out of these said IoT devices can now be electronic record under this particular definition. So therefore, the ambit of cyber law on IoT is very broad, but I believe given the distinctive legalities that IoT brings in, it's going to be a different ballgame per se. Next slide, please. The end of the day, all these IoT-based manufacturers, device manufacturers, are nothing but intermediaries, thanks to Section 21W of the IT Act. So I believe it's a game-changing element. Now we already started to see that the intermediary guidelines were formulated 2021 by the Government of India. But one of the most significant aspects is when I look at the landscape of IoT-based intermediaries, it's a different ballgame. These guys who are now intermediaries under Section 21W are now responsible for having in place reasonable security practices and procedures, failing which they get exposed to two kinds of liability, civil and criminal liability per se. Civil by way of compensation up to 5 crore rupees per contravention, and criminal ranging from imprisonment ranging from 3 years to life imprisonment, fine ranging from 1 lakh rupees to 10 lakh rupees, or both. I think these are the kinds of exposures that the said IoT-based manufacturers can have in case they do not exercise their due diligence, as also have in place reasonable security practices and procedures. But broadly speaking, this is a kind of legal compliance, and we don't have a dedicated data protection law in India. We are awaiting the personal data protection bill to be passed in the year 2021. But in the meantime, just to give you that kind of an understanding that these devices and device manufacturers are also now brought very well under the ambit of IT Act. Next slide, please. So when I look at US, it's a different ballgame altogether because they are now come up with something which is completely different. We have the Cybersecurity Improvement Act, which applies typically to any of the devices, IoT-based devices, which are now being procured or purchased by government money. So in addition to these, they come up with some minimum standards of security that these devices would have to now have in place. And it will not only affect the new IoT purchases, but the major drawback is it does not have retrospective effects because the existing IoT devices will not be brought under the ambit. So I believe that this is just a law on the eye, and I believe that a lot of legal work is now already started to be done in different countries with regard to IoT cybersecurity. Next slide, please. Now, California has now come up with this wonderful piece of legislation, which is called the IoT Security Law. And then it has tried to bring in some kinds of due diligence parameters and reasonable securities and practices and procedures, which the IoT manufacturers would now have to exercise in order to help themselves comply to the said legislation. Next slide, please. Now, broadly, these are some parameters that the Californian IoT security law has come up with. They are now trying to provide some kinds of reasonable security features with regard to the nature and function of the device, and also with regard to the information that the device collects or shares or transmits, and also protecting the device and also the information from not just cyber attacks, but also from any kinds of unauthorized access, destruction, use, modification, or disclosure. So any inadvertent disclosures also are now going to be putting in different kinds of obligations upon these IoT-based device manufacturers. Next slide, please. Now, they also defined what is this reasonable security features that the IoT-based manufacturers would have to keep in mind. They must, number one, have a pre-programmed password, which is obviously going to be different and unique for every device that they manufacture. Second, they must also, in addition to the same, also have another form of authentication before the said device grants access to the respective user for the first time. So therefore, two-factor authentication is also something that is now being the onus of responsibility on the said IoT manufacturers based upon these reasonable security measures. So passwords as well as two-factor authentication is something that the Californian IoT law proposes. Next slide, please. The UK has also come up with yet another piece of legislation, which is called the UK's IoT Cybersecurity Law. So this legislation puts in certain kinds of mandatory requirements upon these manufacturers. Now, first, they have to improve the consumer data security. They'll have to have cybersecurity by design incorporated. So just like I was talking to you about privacy being the design that the device manufacturers would have to be applying, I think on the similar ground, they'll have to also incorporate cybersecurity as an integral part of the said device. And more specifically, some kinds of basic level of security is also something that the UK law has come up with. When I talk of IoT security for these respective devices, and the responsibility of, they're also putting up certain responsibility upon the customers to secure their own devices per se. So this is an interesting piece of legislation per se. I think new models have started to emerge by various countries upon protecting IoT cybersecurity per se. I think these are great direction and takeaways that countries have to quickly realize while they're formulating legal provisions or doing any kinds of legislative frameworks with regard to IoT devices per se. Next slide, please. Now, this law comes up with three major requirements: passwords, and the manufacturers would also be required to have some kind of a public point of contact wherein they kind of encourage people to report any kinds of vulnerabilities. So vulnerability reporting is also now being made an essential requirement under this UK's IoT-based law. And they'll also have to be very cautious in defining the minimum period of security updates. So in case the said device would have updates, they'll have to be specifically mentioning the kind of tenure of updates, like every 3 months, every 6 months, every 45 days, every 90 days. These have to be specified on the device when they're actually being sold. I think this is a very interesting kind of a step, shall I say, because today a lot of attacks, including phishing attacks and other kinds of malicious attacks, are happening when the said device asks you or prompts you for any kinds of update per se. You do not know whether it's a legitimate update or whether it's any kind of a phishing that has taken place per se. So these three are new parameters: passwords, reporting vulnerabilities, having public contact of public point of contact, and also specifying the minimum period of security updates are the three kinds of guidelines that these IoT based law of UK has in place. Next slide, please. Now, also the IoT-based Cybersecurity Improvement Act of the US also will now be providing certain kinds of new security standards for government contracts. So that's also going to be very interesting per se, because these guys, when they're executing when these devices are being used for government contracts, I think it's going to be a different set of guidelines that the manufacturers will now have to be complying with. Next slide, please. Yes. So finally, the federal IoT security legislation has now become a ground reality. And now the Act also prohibits the procurement of insecure IoT devices. That's a very interesting statement per se. Next slide, please. So just like the UK, this model also has some key pointers. This is going to be made applicable for federal agencies of the government. Certain minimum cybersecurity standards have been defined. The NIST has now been given the opportunity to actually come up with some standards, which are now being called as minimum cybersecurity standards. And vulnerability reporting, just like the UK law, notifications would also have to be generated with regard to the same. I think these are very interesting scenarios that are likely to bring in more onus of responsibility on the IoT device manufacturers in order to ensure that they protect and preserve cybersecurity per se. Next slide, please. So I believe that a lot of cyber crimes and cyber contraventions are taking place in these IoT devices. Hacking, I already gave you an example of hacking. Data theft, it's now a different ballgame altogether. We already started to see the man in the middle attacks. So we have these DDoS attacks. So DDoS are called distributed denial of service attacks. It's going to be very interesting because when an attacker makes use of more than one system to launch his attack, and that's going to be an interesting ball game per se. Just imagine getting hit with 100 computers at one time. That's a different ball game. Now, breach of confidentiality and privacy are going to be something that the IoT devices will have to be constantly alive. The reason here is we do not have any kind of an idea what kind of confidential information is how the confidentiality is per se protected in the said IoT devices. How what kind of data sharing points that the said device has, to whom all is it going to share information? Will it seek my consent? I think these are very interesting challenges per se. And they can also be used for disseminating computer contaminants like virus, trojans, malwares, spywares, etc. Now, by and large, I think one of the factors that these IoT device manufacturers will have to observe is the kind of privacy breaches and the kind of confidential breaches. The reason here why I'm trying to tell you that is, I'll just give you a small thing. You can all go today, once you finished attending the session, go to your respective device and then switch on the device and keep talking to somebody about any particular aspect. Now, after that, go and open your mobile phone. You'll be surprised to see that there'll be a lot of search results based on the discussions that you have actually had. So inbuilt microphones are enabled by these IoT devices, and they go on to record all kinds of conversations that are taking place in the surroundings. So, well, I'll also have interesting cases where I'll try to tell you about how these are used as evidence. But I think this is going to bring in huge amount of privacy breaches also when I talk to you about recording the conversations or spying upon the conversations without any proper consent. I think these are something that we'll have to constantly be alive. So unauthorized access and related contraventions are also likely to bring in huge kinds of cyber contraventions and cyber crimes, shall I say. If the intention is noble, may amount to cyber contravention. If you have the mens rea and actus reus, it's going to be a cyber crime. Next slide, please. IoT ransomware has also become the now has become the new jewel in the crown, shall I say? The reason here is ransomware attacks have also been targeted with the help of these IoT devices. Just imagine that today we are all using these IoT devices left, right, and center for different purposes: personal, professional, social, per se. So one of the major things is that there's a lot of interconnectedness happening across these devices, and in case one of these devices gets itself uh, unauthorized access, unauthorizedly accessed by someone, I think it's opening new kinds of floodgates of exposures for the other devices also. Just imagine you wake up and then you get a message on your mobile or your IoT device that, hey, I've got the complete control of the same. You pay me such and such an amount as ransom, I will release the said control of the said device. So it's going to be a different matter, because these devices can also be used for targeting not just privacy but also data and other things. Specifically, in case you're using the same for work from home scenarios. So it's a different ball game altogether. Next slide, please. So contracts is also something that's likely to bring in a different kind of a paradigm altogether when I talk of IoT based contracts. I think these industrial IoT applications that I was talking to you about bring in huge amounts of different kinds of contractual issues with regard to the IoT devices. One of the primary aspects is all these contracts are automated, and can these IoT devices be empowered to execute contracts with human beings? Do they really have the authority? That's a great question. Because when you look at the Contract Act, free consent is something that the contract legally valid contract has. But how can we ensure that there's a free consent on the part of the machine? That's an interesting question. And can it be executed? Now, how will you determine whether, without the human knowledge or interference, can these go ahead and execute contracts? What happens when, in case there is a frustration of contract or contractual dispute in this scenario? It's a very interesting question. Of course, broadly, all these are electronic contracts, and there's no denying the fact that looking at Section 10A of the IT Act, all of these are legally valid contracts, because no contract should be denied legal enforceability solely because it is an electronic form. So, given this wording of the Section 10A, I think these are all going to be legally valid contracts. But one of the challenges that I would like to pose here is, how will you determine whether these are actually there's a free consent here? And second, when it comes to executing the contract, do they really have the power? What is the legal status of these devices? That's going to be a very interesting question per se, because somewhere down the line, if you don't have any clarity on how these devices actually operate legally, what's the legal status of them? Is it a representative? Is it an agent? Is it a legal person? I think somewhere down the line, questions to these, answers to these questions will also have to be answered in order to determine the liability and scope of the said contractual disputes per se. So it's a very fascinating space, but we are yet to see different kinds of issues that are likely to happen. And second, in case there's a breach of contract that is executed between this IoT device and human being, can the IoT device move to the court for the purpose of contractual breach? Well, you need to have some kind of a legal status, because only corporations and companies who have been recognized as a legal person have the capacity to sue or to be sued. So that's a very interesting question, shall I say, when I talk about the contractual aspect. Next slide, please. Now, consumer protection law is also likely to be impacting IoT devices, because the moment there is some kind of an issue with regard to the IoT devices, whether it's a defective device or whether there is any kinds of any other product related issues, I think consumer protection law will definitely be coming under the ambit of these IoT devices per se. So the IoT device manufacturers will also be now prone to consumer protection laws, shall I say, in case of any kinds of issues per se. Next slide, please. Now, there's going to be a lot of intellectual property that's likely to get generated out of these IoT based devices, because a lot of conversations that are recorded, a lot of information that is stored. Let's just take the example of Amazon Alexa. Now, you go ahead and say, Alexa, play this song. So, what happens to the content there? Who owns the content? If the content is licensed, is the license going to cover these issues? That's going to be very interesting questions per se. Who owns the kind of data sets that are fed into the IoT devices? And does fair use cover any kinds of copyright music that's actually been played across these IoT devices? I think these are going to be enormous amount of questions from an IPR standpoint of view when I talk about IoT per se. And can I rely upon IoT based inventions? Can I go ahead and patent them? Can I go ahead and actually try to seek copyright for any of the kind of content that is generated by these IoT devices? Very interesting challenges per se. But I think these will also bring in huge amount of IPR legal issues on the horizon when I talk about IoT and IPR. Next slide. So legal liability is a different ball game altogether because negligence, the duty of care. How will you be able to demonstrate that the said IoT device is not negligent? That means there's no breach of duty. That's a very interesting question. And in case of any device malfunction, obviously we have consumer protection laws, and we also have the product liability that will come into picture when I talk of these devices. But what becomes important is in determining and assessing the scope of liability of these IoT devices will be very challenging because given the interconnectedness, look at the image that will be able to deliver the interconnectedness. So these are interconnected with so many different applications. Now, how will you determine at which point the negligence has taken place? That's a very interesting question per se. Next slide, please. Jurisdiction, I believe internet has made geography a history. So given the fact that these IoT devices are manufactured in one place, used in one place, and in case they actually happen to collect the data of somebody who does not belong to this place, then and that said information in question gets breached, then it's going to be a different jurisdictional game altogether in this kind of a scenario. Because which court will have the jurisdiction will be a very interesting point. Of course, broadly, when I look at the way in which the present devices are structured, I think all these devices have some kinds of policies in place, and you'll have to accept and then only make use of the said devices. So just like we have the e-commerce platforms, we are agreeing and then executing an electronic contract with these devices, and we're going ahead, and we already have some jurisdictional points that have been mentioned in the said contracts per se. But I think jurisdiction will be a different matter altogether because we have so many different kinds of jurisdictional issues that can come in. But broadly, when I look at the landscape of jurisdiction under the IT Act, specifically Section 75 and Section 1, Subsection 2 of the IT Act, if any IoT device, irrespective of wherever it is manufactured, in case it's affecting any computer system, computer resource, computer communication device, as also data or information in the electronic form in which is physically located in India, I think they can be tried under the present extraterritorial jurisdiction under the said provisions. But all this is just confined to the paper. I think countries are in the MLAT mode, and then I think it's time that jurisdictional issues also in the light of IoT would have to be specifically addressed. Next slide, please. Legal evidence, absolutely, because given the fact that they're all electronic records, I think all of these IoT devices, whatever is generated out of these, can be used as legal evidence and can definitely be used in a court of law. But remember that in case you're submitting a copy of the same of the said information as electronic evidence, thanks to the latest judgment of the Supreme Court in Arjun Pandit Rao case, you will have to carry a Section 65B certificate accompanying your evidence, telling which the court will treat this as waste paper basket material. This is something that will have to constantly be alive. But one technical challenge that I have here is who's going to certify that the said algorithms in the said IoT devices were working fine when actually you tried to extract the said information as evidence. So that's a different ball game altogether, and I think it's going to bring in huge amounts of legal and also technical challenges in cases like that. Next slide. I'm just concluding with the interesting case studies that I have, and then I'm open for questions. So we have the first case that I would like to tell you is that these IoT-based devices, specifically something called Alexa, is also acted as a witness in one particular case. So the said information which is stored in Alexa was actually taken up as evidence for a murder investigation because a woman was killed by a spear in Florida somewhere in 2019 July, and the audio recordings were recorded by the said device during the respective attack, and this was used as digital evidence to resolve the respective murder case. So this is what I'm trying to tell you, that these material that is available that in your IoT devices can be used as legal evidence. So be very, very careful in the kind of electronic evidence that you generate out of the said device. Be very watchful because any kinds of conversations uh, can get recorded there, and once they get recorded, even a small threat can amount to criminal conspiracy per se. Next slide, please. So the geolocation data today, that's also something that's tracked by these IoT devices, the geolocation data. So Denmark, there's a different matter altogether. 32 prisoners were released, and the entire reliance was relied upon the geolocation data out of the mobile phone and the mobile operators per se. And what happened in this scenario? The software was used where the system was actually be able to tell that they were all connected to different towers at the same time. So as a result, there were lawful convictions. So I think these are illustrations of telling how evidence can be manipulated. I don't even say manipulated, how it can be used uh, against a respective person, and it can cause innocent convictions also. Next slide. So in this scenario, the Fitbit that we all use today, I think there's a lot of kind of an evidence that is generated out of this said device. And a 90-year-old woman who was one of the primary suspects in a murder case of her stepdaughter. She visited her stepdaughter in California, and there were a lot of these head and neck based injuries that have taken place. And let me tell you that during the said period, they got the during the said investigation, they got this Fitbit device in the respective crime scene. They went on to actually try to analyze the evidence out of the said device by using forensics. And what was interesting is the heart rate was spiked at the time when this particular lady was arrested based on the respective heart rate which was collected out of this said device. So this are some illustrations to just demonstrate and they take you to some kinds of understanding. But I believe that governments are slowly empowering their hands, and there's no denying the fact that these IoT devices can also be a flip flop. So while we're all digging our heads into the sand, I think it's a different ball game per se. I think in the light of IoT, it's going to be a make or break move. I can say. Next slide, please. So these are some IoT devices that are being used by lawyers. If you look at wearables, then smartwatches and Fitbits, digital assistants, Alexas, Echoes, and Google Nest, smart gadgets, TV, microwave, refrigerator, ovens, and also we have the smart home or automation tools that are there per se. Now, what becomes very important is the interconnectedness. I just want to tell you one last thing before I conclude. Just imagine that in case your said mobile phone is having the confidential data of your company and is connected with any of these home automation devices, including a smart plug or a smart bulb or a smart gadget at home. Any compromise can not only expose the said device, but can also expose your company's data to the attackers. So in this kind of a scenario, I think we'll have to be fully conscious of the fact that you'll have to, when you're playing with fire, it's adequately important that you understand the kind of damage that the fire is likely to have upon you. Next slide, please. So while I can just conclude by saying that IoT will bring in huge amount of legal policy regulatory aspects on the table, well, different countries have already woken up and have started coming up with dedicated laws on IoTs, and specifically IoT cybersecurity would have to be the primary agenda. And while we're on the cusp of addressing the cyber legalities relating to emerging technologies, I think it's time to wake up and come out of deep slumber and then trying to come up with some kind of legal provisions talking about cyber security in the light of IoT. And also given the fact that there's an intertwining opportunity between this IoT and the other technologies like AI, blockchain, 3D printing, and the like. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the law, how the legislations, and how the jurisprudence surrounding IoT in India develops as time passes by. So with this, I conclude my session. Thank you once more for this wonderful opportunity. And as I always say, what is necessary is only what is required. Please go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so what is necessary is only what is required. So I believe given the short span of time, I thought I should just give you some kind of a glimpse on the legalities pertaining to IoT. So there's a lot more that is to be discussed, but I believe that these are just platforms to create some kind of directional thoughts. I think on the top of it, these are going to be some things that we'll all have to quickly realize when it comes to IoT and law. Next slide. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasure talking to all of you today. And I thank the organizers once more, the host, and also all the people who have been watching us on YouTube and other social media for this wonderful opportunity. And I'm open to any questions.
Thank you so much, sir. So we have some questions with us here from our viewers. So should I start with the first question?
Yes, please go ahead.
So the first question is, how do we know that the presence of this IoT is there in the particular device?
Very simple. See, whenever you have internet-enabled connectivity in a device, that becomes an IoT device. So if a device is capable of getting connected to the net, that's an IoT device.
So the next question is, viewer wants to know more about the upcoming data protection bill and its relation with the current IoT. If so, any there.
See, I must say that we don't have the final cut of the rules that have been come up. I only know that we have around 89 amendments that were made. I don't think that there's a public release of the said personal data protection guidelines. But all I can tell you is that unless we have specific provisions relating to the IoT devices, because given the kind of distinctive nature that it has, I think it will bring in huge amount of legal issues. Because let me give you an example of GDPR. We have the European Data Protection Law, which is the General Data Protection Regulation. And one of the most complicated setup in that is that there are some kinds of data subject rights. So even that means what? If you are a person whose personal data is collected, you have been given some rights. What are these rights? Stop sharing it. If you don't want your information to be shared with other stakeholders, you can restrict it. You can ask for rectification in case there is a misinformation of yours. You can also go ahead and ask them to erase any particular data, and you can ask them to port any data, and also you can ask them to ask what kind of security measures that they have with respect to your data. But just imagine the kind of rights applied in the context of IoT, because IoT, how many devices can be connected? How many kinds of applications are connected together? How will you ensure that all of these are? If you say stop sharing it with them, if I stop sharing it with them, I may not be able to give you the respective service that I want, that you want, using my device. So all these are going to be bringing in different parameters altogether. And if I say erase my data, without the data, how can these devices process? For example, let's say the Fitbit. So if I say don't collect my heart rate, I'll not be able to get any information with the said device. So said device becomes useless. I think all these will be really interesting challenges, because largely even our data protection bill is based on GDPR. So I think these are some things at a basic level that I can tell you that are likely to be there when I talk about IoT and data protection law.
Sir, so the next question is there any international laws guiding the use and misuse of the IoT-based device?
Yes, see, there is no international law relating to guiding that, but there are some laws, as I told you, in California, UK, and also in some places of the US, where they've come up with certain basic parameters that these device manufacturers would have to come up with while they're rolling out these devices. So those will provide information relating to cybersecurity and privacy. So some compliance measures have been given on them, but regarding the usage of that, there's no guideline per se given by any law. But some direction has been given with regard to only the manufacturers per se.
So the next question is, what laws should be implemented in India to reduce the lacunae which is already there in the exploitation and misuse of the IoT services?
See, I think one of the good ways is go ahead and amend Information Technology Act, because it's already been more than a decade that's now been there. And second, I think some kinds of cyber security laws have to be coming up, because cyber security is going to be paramount to any kind of technology, whether it's blockchain, artificial intelligence, or IoT. Cyber security will be of primary importance. I think some kinds of roles and responsibilities on the manufacturers with regard to cyber security, and telling them that this security measures have to be complied with while you're rolling out these devices would be a very good option that I feel that can now be looked at by India also in that direction, because countries have come up with different kinds of stands. So you can pick and choose and make it topical so that it's suitable even to the Indian conditions per se.
So, sir, that also will come under like consumer-based laws of product liability and all that as well, right? Making the
No, see, product liability is a different matter. I'm specifically talking about cyber security. See, product liability talks about the basic standards of production. For example, the minimum standards that I have to have. There should not be any malfunction. There should not be any kinds of device failures. All of these are different, but coming up with standards which are specifically protecting cyber security and privacy will be the requirement, because these cyber security will be very important, because the data that you have will be all kinds of personal and sensitive data. If you don't adequately protect them, then it will be a different matter altogether. So product liability will only confine to product, not to the kind of data or the kind of privacy that these devices should protect.
So the next question is, usually in contracts, we come across parties who agree on local authority and laws applicability in the jurisdiction for any issues arising as a part of breach of terms. However, can you shed some light in terms of overseas contract and laws impacted and how it's handled with some examples?
See, what primarily is happening today is that whenever we are actually making use of any kinds of applications, we are agreeing to the terms and conditions of the respective application, which we call as an electronic contract. And in the said contract, there's also going to be a jurisdiction clause. The jurisdictional clause will be in a position where you can't negotiate anything. For example, just say you're using Netflix, or you're using Amazon for that matter, or you're using an Apple smartwatch. Let's take IoT devices only. Let's say you're using an Apple smartwatch. Now you already entered into a contract with Apple where you're saying that you're agreeing to the jurisdiction that, Apple, wherever it says, suppose it says US is the jurisdiction, yes, you're agreeable to that. And then you're going ahead and agreeing to that and then making use of the said device. So what happens in this scenario is that one way of looking at it is that jurisdiction is already defined. The second way of looking at it is the cause of action. Where is the cause of action arisen? So even that court, does it have any kind of jurisdiction? Now, broadly speaking, under the IT Act, what we have today, Section 75 or Section 1 or subsection 2, if it is affecting a person who's physically located in India, then even Indian courts, Indian law will also be applicable on them. But no courts or no police are able to file cases on the said service providers as co-accused for any of the cyber events. I don't see any reason, but I think that jurisdictional issue is a huge problem, not only with IoT, but given any technology per se. Take artificial intelligence, take blockchain, anything, jurisdiction is a problem, because the major drawback is, given the internet has made geography a history. So therefore that is going to bring in huge problems. There's no one-sided answer for it. Everything has a different kind of an approach. One way of looking at it is that these provisions, you can go ahead and exercise the provisions under this IT Act. Other way of looking at it is anyway that the use of the said device is governed by the terms and conditions. Whichever jurisdiction is mentioned there, that will also obviously be the jurisdiction that will be applicable for any disputes or issues arising out of the use of the said product. You can have two sides of the coin, basically.
Thank you so much, sir. And last question is, can we control the flow of data or information using COTS antivirus application?
Can you control the?
Can we control the flow of data or information using the COTS antivirus application?
See, it all depends, because obviously what happens in this scenario is that if it is a COTS or MOTS, I think as is something that we'll have to understand, because everything that you see, they're using these terms called as is. That means it is with limited or no warranty per se. So I don't think anything can be a one-time solution for controlling all of these, but I think yes, that can be to a certain extent better to actually control the said dissemination of the said things. But I don't think it's a complete solution per se.
So also, like how can a layman understand that his data is being breached, and what should the steps that the person should, what are the steps that the person should take thereafter once he knows that the IoT devices are breaching his devices? What are the first steps which should be taken?
See, the first thing, first and foremost, is that please understand. See, as a layman, whenever you're actually making use of an IoT device, please look at the policies that it has, because the policies will be able to tell you how the data is shared, whether who are all the people who are going to be accessing your data, and how what kind of security measures do these guys have. Do they have a data breach notification? It means data breach notification is in case there's a data breach happening from their end, do they have the obligation to notify you? Because when you look at GDPR, it gives you a mandatory data breach notification. That means if the data breach is taking place at the manufacturer's end, then he must be absolutely responsible for disclosing and giving the respective breach notification to the user, saying that I am being breached, I've been attacked. So be very careful on the kind of data. So that's number one. Number two is that all you need to do is please look at the policies, and please do not, whenever you're discussing something on relating to your confidential information, please switch off the device, and then remove it from the place wherever you're having the discussion as a layman, because you do not have any understanding on who are going to be recording what. So that's going to be a very interesting ball game per se. And third thing, please go ahead and report. We have reporting mechanisms that have been made available now. When you look at these applications, the IoT applications policies, some of them will say that you have a grievance officer to whom you can report. You can go ahead and lodge a report to them. You also have something called CERTIN, so Computer Emergency Response Team in India. So you can go and also submit a request to them that this is what has happened. You can also go ahead and register a complaint under cybercrime, which is cybercrime.gov.in. You can go to this respective portal and report your breach instance that has taken place. I think these are some first steps that I can see.
Thank you so much, sir. With that, there are questions. We come to the end of the questions. Also, thank you so much, sir, for taking out time today for us and all our attendees and sharing your insight on IoT and its related laws. We are coming up with a short-term 3-month certified course on introduction of the cyber laws. The classes will be held online with weekly live sessions. To know more about the course, please write to us interested and your WhatsApp number or the email address in the comment box, and the team will get in touch with you. Mail will be shared with all the attendees that describe the method of attaining the e-certificate of participation. Kindly read that and adhere to the mentioned pointers. Thank you all. Have a lovely Sunday.